Sanji chudan soji chonam la chanchu pardo dani japsu chi dagi jinso jibe sunam chi rola benjira sanji robasho sanji chudan soji chonam la chanchu pardo dani chamsu chi dagi jinsu jibe sunam chi rola penchir sanji droba shu sanji chuda suji chonam la chanchu pardo dani chamsu chi dagi jinsu jibe sunam chi rola penchira sanje dropa shu semche tamche dewa tan dewe jodan dembar church dongar tan dongar che jodan travar church dongar mebe dewa tamba tan mendravar church Nirin chadan tan treve tan yom chenpo la nebar churchi semche tamche dewa tan devi jo tan dembar churchi dongar tan dongar che jo tan travar churchi dongar mepe dewa tamba tan mendra var churchi Nirin chadan dan treve tan yom chenpo la nebar churchi semche tamche dewa devi jodan dembar churchi dongre che jodan travar churchi dongre mebe dewa tamba dan mendra var churchi Nirin chadan tan treve tan yom chenpo la nebar churchi Chomden de jambe yang lai chan tsai lo kange lo dren dim nye dren dra nye dra nam da ram sar vai chi nye dun gun chi jen si chi ni chi to kar le bam Kanda sebe tsara ma ri mun tuma dung re chi sir ve dro tso kyun la pu chi tar se yen la chu chu yang den ru dar che ro nyu mo nye long li chi cha ro ro zi chen ma ri mun se dung re nyu gu chi nye chun ze ra chen Dene tajin sa chu tar sun yun tene lu so gyar se tu yu ku chu tra chu tan chu ni jen da lu mun sir jan be yang lai du tse den chu je chen ra bu sir che da lu de mu mun ba rap san ka dan den chu shun lu to pa ye lo zhe bo bian han wa car do sor.
Ineffable, inconceivable, inexpressible perfection of wisdom, not produced and not ceased, space in essence, domain of individual reflexive awareness, homage to the mother of victors from all three times. Homage to the glorious perfection of wisdom. Thus have I heard, once the glorious one was residing at Vulture's Peak in Rajagriha together with a great assembly of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the glorious one abided evenly in the samadhi of the aspects of phenomena called the appearance of the profound. Also, at the same time, the noble Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva Madhasattva, beholding the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, observed that even the five aggregates are empty of substance. Then, by the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva. How should a son of the lineage or a daughter of the lineage train who wishes to practice in the profound perfection of wisdom? Addressed in this way, the noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, said this to the venerable son of Sharadvati. Sariputra, the son of the lineage or the daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom should observe in this way. They should view correctly that even the five aggregates are empty of substance. Matter is emptiness. Emptiness is matter. Emptiness is not other than matter. Matter is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, a perception, conditioning, and consciousness are empty. Thus, Shariputra, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, not produced, not ceased, stainless, not free of stain, undiminished, unfulfilled. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no matter, no feeling, no perception, no conditioning, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no phenomenon, no eye constituent until no mental constituent, up to and including no mental consciousness constituent, no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance until no aging and death, up to and including no extinction of aging and death. There is no suffering, origin, cessation, or path, no wisdom, no attainment, no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, because bodhisattvas have no attainment, they rely on and abide in the perfection of wisdom. Their minds having no obscuration, they have no fear, and passing entirely beyond falsity, they completely pass beyond sorrow. All the Buddhas who abide in the three times by relying too on the perfection of wisdom have fully awakened into the unsurpassable, true, and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom is the mantra of great insight, the mantra of the unsurpassable, the mantra peering with the peerless, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, because it does not deceive. It should be known to be true. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is stated, Teyata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, in that way, Bodhisattva Mahasattvas should train in the profound perfection of wisdom. Then the glorious one arose from that samadhi and praised the noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva. Well done, son of the lineage, it is like that. Son of the lineage, it is like that, just as you have taught it, the profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced. Even the Tathagatas admire it. After the glorious one had thus spoken, the venerable son of Sharadvati, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Avalokiteshvara, and all of those surrounding, and the entire world with its gods, humans, demigods, and Gandharvas in admiration praised the words of the glorious one. Teyata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. We left off with appearance of the profound. The Buddha enters into samadhi, that is the appearance of the profound in terms of the aspects of phenomena. Appearance here appears with realization in the Tibetan. There's also Nyompar Shukpa, entering into equilibrium, entering into absorption of a samadhi. The term here, absorption, is in the Tibetan. There's this aspect in English, it's stated abided evenly. Here. Nompar means mine is continually placed on one point during samadhi that is entirely even. At this point in the text comes we are introduced to the principal teacher in this text, the primary speaker, if you will, who is Avalokiteshvara. Avalokiteshvara is one of the most important and well-known bodhisattvas of the Great Vehicle. Generally, as we saw, he's one of the 8 great bodhisattvas, one of the 8 great sons, and particularly he holds an important place as the bodhisattva who personifies the compassion of all Buddhas. Nevertheless, despite his importance, this Sutra of the Perfection of Wisdom is the only one in which he appears as the primary speaker. This is the only major sutra of the Perfection of Wisdom where we see Avalokiteshvara speak. His name means Avalokita Ishvara, Avalokiteshvara. 2 terms. Avalokita, we briefly mentioned earlier. It means one who observes, somewhere who looks below or who watches over, who observes beings with compassion. And then the Ishvara, Kerezik Wangchuk. Kerezik translates Avalokit, and Wangchuk, Ishvara. In terms of the ability or power, one who watches over beings and is endowed with power. That's the meaning. And endowed with power here means he has the power, he's acquired the power of dissipating the suffering of sentient beings. And this is the meaning of this term Ishvara. He is a bodhisattva. So there is the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, beholding the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, observed that even the 5 aggregates are empty of substance. We already commented this term, bodhisattva. We know what it means. And there's also the term Mahasattva. Of course, bodhisattva indicates one who has generated bodhicitta, who is committed to the great vehicle. And sometimes this term, bodhisattva, is associated with this term, mahasattva, which means maha means great, and sattva, as we said, is being or greatness of intention or courage. So this greatness refers to the greatness of their generosity or greatness of their discernment or the greatness of their power. The greatness of their perseverance, the greatness of their capacity for mastering the afflictions. This refers to all these things. Also, according to some commentators, the term Mahasattva also underlines the altruism of bodhisattva. In other words, a mahasattva is one whose mind is oriented toward accomplishing the benefit of other sentient beings. A mahasattva is thus someone who is entirely altruistic, who thinks first about the benefit of all sentient beings. Also, this commentary adds that these names appear together, Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, because that the term Mahasattva can also designate other individuals who don't have this intention of accomplishing enlightenment for the benefit of all beings, but who nevertheless have great benevolence. So in this case, this being is a bodhisattva who does have this intention of pursuing enlightenment for the benefit of all beings, in addition to having these great qualities. A bodhisattva, because this being establishes themselves or is working towards most supreme enlightenment, and then Mahasattva, because they make an effort to establish all beings in this enlightenment. The master, Limala Mitra, in his commentary adds, term Mahasattva refers to the greatness of their perfection in the sense that they have actualized the bodhisattva levels. In other words, they have realized, they've actualized another realization. They have realized ultimate bodhicitta. Also, Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, because they are on the path toward enlightenment without any possibility of straying away from enlightenment. And then there's another title, noble. We find this often in translations. The term translated by noble is Arya, Dhagpo in Tibetan, Dongchub Sempa Chinpo, and then Pakpa for Arya. This can be translated by noble or superior. It's not noble or superior in terms of social designations. This concerns realization. To distinguish a being from an ordinary being, the term Arya designates a being who has a greater degree of wisdom, discernment particularly, who has discerned the absence of existence of self, and also the absence of existence of phenomena, either one or both of these things. So Arya can designate the realized practitioners of the Shravaka and Pratyeka Buddha vehicles, but also bodhisattvas who realize that in terms of practitioners of the Shravakayana and the Pratyeka Buddha yana, they realize the non-self of the individual, whereas bodhisattvas recognize both. So this underlines Avalokiteshvara's great realization. Again, there's also at that time, meaning at the same time. This is at the same time that the Buddha is abiding in samadhi. At the same time, Avalokiteshvara observed, beholding, it says, beholding the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom. He saw the practice and observed the lack of substantial existence of the five aggregates. Also at this time, the noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, beholding the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, observed that even the five aggregates are empty of substance. Yesterday, we already described what we can understand by wisdom and perfect. I won't go over this again. We looked at the different forms of wisdom, what a perfect paramita indicates. What do we understand by this beholding the practice and observed that even the five aggregates are empty of substance, of production, and of cessation, that the five aggregates of matter, etc., are also empty and free of production and cessation of being in and of themselves. In terms of the view, the way of seeing, there's an ordinary way of seeing, the way of seeing of the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, and the way of seeing of the Bodhisattvas and Tathagatas. Ordinary beings consider the five aggregates as a living individual, a self, a person. The Pratyeka Buddhas and Shravakas see it as being the source of suffering. Out of the Four Noble Truths, the five aggregates are seen as being empty of inherent existence. This is the way of seeing of the Shravaka and Pratyeka Buddhayana. Here we can also come back to the meaning of the words of Avalokiteshvara, the meaning here, who watches over beings. He personifies love and especially compassion of all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And when we talk about compassion, we can distinguish 3 forms of compassion. Compassion that observes sentient being, compassion that observes phenomena, and compassion that observes the inobservable. Of these 3 forms, Avalokiteshvara watches over beings by observing the unobservable. Out of the 3 forms of compassion, we go from the most ordinary compassion to a greater and greater subtlety. We can do a little review here. Might be useful for you in your practice as well. We can try to understand the meaning of love and compassion that are at the heart of the Bodhisattva's practice, that are implicitly present here. When we talk about a bodhisattva, of course, this involves bodhicitta, and bodhicitta is founded on love and compassion toward all sentient beings. It's important to correctly understand this. First, the term love, which it's conventional today to use this word to translate the term maitri. It can translate this in terms of kind love or benevolent love, not to be confused with love in the ordinary sense. Often when we use the term love, this is confused with the notion of desire. I love something, I'm attracted by something, something pleases me. And this is associated with attachment. What's the definition that is given in the practice of maitri, or of loving kindness? It does not include this desire. It concerns, the definition that's given is wanting an intention that aims for the benefit or happiness of other sentient beings. That is, sincerely wanting others to be happy. Such as a parent views their child. That's the example that's given. A mother's love for their child. She wants them to be happy. There is a disinterested aspect. There's not something for me. Whereas love, when it's combined with desire, it's for me. I love it and I want it for myself. Whereas here, the meaning of love, maitri, is for the other. It's wanting the benefit of the other, the well-being of the other. Not in the sense that I sacrifice myself for the other. That's another potential confusion. Abnegation in terms of sacrificing ourselves for the other. That I will place myself below and only focus on the other. No, this is not the meaning of maitri. It is kindness towards others and also towards ourselves that aims for others' benefit and well-being. As much as I focus on my own well-being, I focus on that for others. And the greater my understanding of reality is, the more my discernment and intelligence grows, then this kindness towards others will also grow. What characterizes this kindness is a state of mind that is free from agitation, free from self-centeredness. It's characterized by calm serenity, which is far from this love that is envy or fear or abnegation that implies suffering. Often in the West, the word love is associated with suffering. To love is to suffer. So this is not at all the same meaning. It's important not to confuse the two. This is why I'm taking the time to explain this aside, because in terms of practice, really in the beginning of practice, when we begin with generating bodhicitta, if we wish to enter the great vehicle, this begins by cultivating maitri toward all sentient beings without exception. Sometimes, for example, when we're practicing maitri, it's suggested that we start with equanimity. There's this practice that we do at the beginning of the session after refuge and bodhicitta. Then there are the four immeasurables. The first is maitri, then is compassion, then joy, and the last is equanimity. The four immeasurables. They're called this because, for several reasons, but one of them is because cultivating them without exception, for all sentient beings without exception, this is an immeasurable number. And also because each of these qualities has immeasurable benefit. So this is why we call them the four immeasurables. There are other translations. Traditionally, two terms are used. One is the four sublime residences, and the other is the four immeasurables. These are the traditional terms used to describe these four qualities. We also find them in the Shravaka vehicle as well as the Bodhisattva vehicle, but the meaning is somewhat different. Maitri, like compassion, once we've put aside this understanding in terms of desire, etc., it is this wish for others' benefit, well-being, happiness, and not discriminating. Often when we practice, we begin by cultivating equanimity. And then on the basis of equanimity, we can cultivate kindness, universal kindness, universal loving kindness, or maitri. So we can begin by recognizing, start to distinguish or discern between loving kindness and ordinary love in terms of the meaning with attachment, etc., that we're used to. So our beings that are dear to me, my family, my parents, my close ones, is what I'm feeling desire, attachment, or is it maitri? I call it that. I love my parents. I love my children. But what is the meaning behind this word when I say I love them? That's something that we need to reflect on to begin. To distinguish, is it because I'm attached to them and I'm hoping for something for myself? Or is it that I want them to be happy, that I want to bring them happiness and kindness? There's an aspect here in love of joy, of appreciating someone. We want to help. Naturally, we want to be of benefit for them. So, what do we experience, really? Often, before even getting into Buddhist practice, but just in daily life as an ordinary practitioner, we can see that a lot of just, even in terms of just an ordinary person in our relationships, behind this word love, to love and loving, in fact, we put all of our afflictions, attachment, expectation, and a lot of suffering arises from this. So if we can just start by discerning this and aim to go from this attachment toward real loving kindness, then and in terms of what we feel that we love, our parents, our children, those who are close to us, this will completely change our relationship. We'll no longer be in a relationship of expectation or attachment. Instead, it will be a relationship of serenity and joy. So, starting to experience this, to begin to discern this, is very beneficial and useful. And we can already begin with ourselves. Some texts mention this. In other words, we must sincerely be very honest with ourselves and see that we have a lot of attachment for ourselves. We may love our parents, our children, but often we love ourselves more. We are particularly preoccupied with ourselves. And what is this love? How do we treat ourselves? Look at, on this level. Is it mitri or not? This is to allow us to learn to love in terms of kindness. It's not to make our love for ourselves grow or increase, but it's to help us understand what it is. Of course, I don't want to suffer. I'd like to experience well-being and calm, all of these things. I would like to offer it to myself. But then ego, our habitual way of loving ourselves, is more connected to desire, attachment, in terms of I must be number one, I must be the best, in terms of rivalry. We can see that attachment carries a lot of suffering with it. There's an imperative to be the best. So somehow I torment myself. My love for myself is a source of torment for myself due to this attachment, due to this demandingness based on me or I. So somehow there is a kind of gentleness and kindness to be able to see what are my abilities, what are my flaws, and to be able to really cultivate what is beneficial and how can we do this better. This is a really important point. It might correct the other extreme that we can fall into in terms of compassion, this idea of sacrificing ourselves for others. In fact, if we truly experience this kindness, This kindness is calm in nature. We ourselves are established in peace. We're free from turmoil and expectations. So even if we do experience love for others, the first person who experiences joy and benefit from this love, in fact, it's ourselves. It's a quality of mind that is a natural ability that is free from attachment, expectation for myself. That's simply peaceful, that's calm in nature, that is really open and generous and sensitive towards others and wants to establish their well-being. This is an ability that we naturally have, that we express naturally, that occurs naturally towards our children or others. It occurs spontaneously. It's necessary to recognize it and then to seek to increase it, to reinforce it. So that this love replaces our usual self-centeredness. Dhamma. There's this aspect of gentleness and kindness, tenderness that's present. But that isn't either, that also isn't attachment. It's not sentimental. Sentimental in the sense of there being a kind of expectation. We want something in return. This aspect is not present. Once we have recognized this, the following step is to go beyond discrimination. Discrimination toward sentient beings. Ordinarily, we spontaneously discriminate beings as being either close to us or more distant from us. The more distant they are from us, the less we feel concerned by them, the more indifference we experience. The closer beings are, the more attached to them we are. Here, the idea is to go beyond all discrimination, to see that fundamentally there's no difference between beings. Beings are insubstantially established as enemy or friend, etc. Of course, this subject could be a very long teaching, but I invite you to study this more in depth. And just to give you a brief idea, love can be truly universal. We can cultivate it toward all sentient beings, and then on this basis, we can experience compassion. The difference between compassion and love is that compassion observes beings suffering, and it is the intention, the will, and the act of easing other beings' suffering, relieving other beings' suffering. And this implies recognizing or being aware of the suffering of sentient beings. So this is love and compassion that observe sentient beings in terms of I'm a subject who observes the object of other beings. I see their qualities, I see their flaws, I wish for them, I wish for their well-being, I wish for them to be free from suffering. Then there's also observing that sentient beings contemplating the suffering of beings is not simply limited to looking at someone who is afflicted by pain, to consider starving children in poor places or sick people and animals. It is also seeing, having compassion for all beings without exception in samsara, whether they're rich or poor, whether they're experiencing happiness or pain today. Just see all beings that are conditioned and how difficult it is for them to obtain any kind of well-being, and how easy it is for them to find themselves in difficult, painful situations. And to see this cycle, the prison of samsara, to see the prison that is conditioned existence that all beings experience. The second type of compassion is understanding phenomena, reality, understanding that all phenomena are impermanent, and see that beings do not see that this is the case, and they become attached to something, hoping that it will last, but due to their misunderstanding, their lack of understanding of reality, they experience suffering. Seeing that there is no self, but that beings become attached to the self and develop affliction. So this is compassion that arises through observing reality. And the third form of compassion that observes the inobservable. If I may, the inobservable here is contemplating emptiness. This is connected to the perfection of wisdom. Of course, Avalokiteshvara is established in the perfection of wisdom. He sees that suffering, sentient beings, samsara, all of this, do not have any being in and of themselves, any form of substantiality. And so, in understanding this, he experiences the greatest form, the most subtle form of compassion. Avalokiteshvara is introduced here. It is indicated that he's here at the same time as the Buddha and contemplates emptiness and sees that the five aggregates are empty of substance. Then, by the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the noble Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva Mahasattva: how should a son of the lineage or a daughter of the lineage train who wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom? Then, by the power of the Buddha. So here, for the first time in the text, we find the term Buddha, no longer Bhagavan, but Buddha, which means it's translated in Tibetan by Sangye, so enlightened. Tibetan gives this etymology. Sang is awakened, all veils are completely dissipated, and Ge meaning completely blossomed, all the capacities, intelligence, the abilities of our mind are fully actualized. This is the meaning of Buddha. And by the power of the Buddha, it's interesting to see here that the Buddha enters into samadhi in order for the virtuous dispositions of beings to ripen. and so that they may penetrate the meaning of the perfection of wisdom, have access to this, if I may, towards enlightenment. This also concerns Avalokiteshvara, but here it is mentioned that it is by the power of the Buddha that, in other words, that Shariputra himself would not have the idea of asking such a question. Under the influence of the Buddha, this occurs. This is particular to the sutras of the Great Vehicle. Shariputra, who is often presented with Mudgayana, two of the great disciples of the Buddha. He was known for his wisness. He was known for his great intelligence. He was among the most talented of the Buddha's disciples, at least among the Shravakas. And here is presented as one who doesn't know and who would not even have the notion of asking this question without the Buddha's influence. So this underlines the subtlety, the greatness, and the depth of this teaching in relation to others. Then, by the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this. So here Shariputra is speaking. He speaks about the English translation is a little different. Son of the lineage is a polite term that was common in India. Other commentaries say that this term was specific, that noble lineage doesn't refer to a specific lineage, but rather to those who are connected with the lineage of the Tathagatas, those who have generated bodhicitta and who are on the bodhisattva's path. That's what's designated here. So he addresses Avalokiteshvara in this way. Then he asks the question, how should a son of the lineage or a daughter of the lineage train who wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom? I said this to the venerable son of Sharadvati, just Shariputra. And then in this edition, which comes from a different Tibetan edition, the edition from Dergye, of the soteriological goal doesn't occur. Have a clear view of the target, even before getting into these extremely profound teachings of emptiness, for example. Often when we say that, we go too far and we say there's nothing if there's no, or if we don't. Very important to, well, just as with love, for compassion, there are perhaps some like a perverted form, like confusing love and desire or love and attachment. We could confuse compassion with feeling afflicted by others' suffering and not being able to act anymore, whereas for self. What makes it that we do not ask than our own problems? We see that we can deal with our own issues and that others' needs seem more important to us. We want so much for beings to be free from this suffering that we are ready to do anything to help them. So in the action of compassion, feel someone, imagine a situation of an ill person and a doctor who needs to help them, and the care that needs to be given is very cumbersome or uncomfortable to accomplish, but the bothered by the unpleasantness of image is, we say that when a bodhisattva sees that they can help, even if they have to go to hell to do so, they go lightheartedly, like an elephant tormented by heat would jump into the water. And this is the relief that knowing that we can help brings us. This is the joy of being able to relieve other beings' suffering. So there is an aspect where, yes, of course, it observes the suffering of others, but it doesn't bring me suffering. It's not about being there and suffering and being pushed back by others' sufferings. We can't even, often it's like this, we can't even look at others' suffering. Whereas in this case, we are able to do something for them. And this ability of a bodhisattva to be able to face suffering and to face the difficulties and suffering of other sentient beings, and their ability to face the difficulties necessary to help them, comes from the perfection of wisdom, because they see that there is no substantiality to beings. And thus they have this capacity, this extraordinary courage. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, let's start with the microphone. You talked about the absence of existence of self, of grasping, and the investigation, observation, the path necessary to realize that there's nothing. Can you take this to its conclusion? To lead us to the conclusion that there's nothing. We don't say there's nothing. We just say that there's no self. That's why I said earlier that it's very important to be very clear on the target. The target is this grasping at I, and what does this I correspond with? It's just grasping. We won't find, if we examine, if we dissect it, we won't find a single, indivisible, permanent thing that corresponds with this I. It's simply grasping, simply an illusion. But that doesn't mean that I'm nothing. Nothing is also reification. So in that case, we've gone too far. We're no longer on the middle path. Then we fall into annihilationism. If, on the other hand, we don't say, no, there's not nothing, there's something, then we're in eternalism. What we need to see is, what are we refuting? Something that in reality has never existed, but that seems to be there to us. But if we look, we don't find it. And it's necessary for our critique of I to be based on its true target, which is this grasping of I. And it needs to transform this. This is, if our, it is necessary for our critique to dissipate this grasping. So in terms of your question, which I think was concerning what we must do or what we can bring, what is the limit? To what extent can we sacrifice? Perhaps that was a question we couldn't hear. it's not a measure in terms of an outer objective. You have to give such and such amount, or you can give up to 100 euros. If you've given 101, it's too much. If you give and it causes you physical pain, then don't do it. There's no concrete measures like this. The measure is in terms, it's an inner measure. It's your own give. And then over time, we understand causality of actions. We understand that giving is meritorious, and then we feel greater joy in giving. And then and because we've cultivated love and compassion out of compassion, and he experienced only joy, no pain. He viewed his body, he saw his body as only a mirage. And if we see things as a mirage, then what is lost? If at a certain moment this can satisfy these sentient beings. So then, of course, the stability of his mind, his great discernment, his understanding, his compassion makes it such that from the beginning to the end of being eaten alive, he felt only joy, not a single moment of regret. But for a beginning bodhisattva, it's important to take care to not be pretentious, not to say, well, I can do that. And then after, there's a risk of feeling regret. Of course, we can aspire to this, but for the moment, we need to practice in accordance with what I can do, what I'm comfortable with. Hello, Rinpoche. I'd like to get her opinion on translation concerning the Tibetan and French, of taking refuge, the last stanza. Often in the text it's translated, may I accomplish Buddhahood. But if we look at the grammatical structure, Sanke is the subject. No, it's the object. May I accomplish enlightenment for the benefit of sentient beings. Droha means sometimes translated by migrants, those who migrate from life to life to life in samsara. Migrants, sentient beings who migrate, who wander in samsara. Droha. Then la indicates for whom. Drola pen. Pen is to help, to be beneficial for. Chir, in order that I may accomplish the benefit of beings. Sangje, then the objective that I would like to obtain, enlightenment. Drupar sho, expressing a wish, and drupar, of course, accomplishment. May I accomplish enlightenment for the benefit of beings who wander in samsara. Thank you. You're welcome. I have a question concerning process of karma. It'll be a little long because it's a bit complicated. Trying to be precise in terms of what I'm asking you. The question that I have to understand what I'm saying when I'm practicing Dorje Sempa. In the beginning of the practice, we say that the goal of this practice is to purify harmful acts and dissipate the veils. That's a first phrase that I'd like to understand correctly. And then When I study the question of karma and the veils, I ran across this phrase, the veil of karma, and I don't understand what this is. The veil of karma. Of course, I have a representation of the other veils, but this one I don't know what I can't see what it is. I'd like to understand better how this works. The process between the act itself, when the act is accomplished, and the result. Of course, we're talking about seeds, imprints, and then fruits. These are terms that we find in the teachings, translations. Any case, I'd like to get some precisions concerning these terms. Imprint and grain, the same thing. My present representations, it's not the same thing. I understand imprint to be something immediate when an act is accomplished that then reinforces a tendency. Like when we dig down into like a rivulet when the water passes again, whereas a seed is specific to a particular act and leads to a result later, don't know when, but later, in the form of a fruit. And this process of maturation is then the object when we talk about purifying harmful actions. That's where I'm at with my representations. Could you clarify this for me? Answer, you're reifying a bit. To simplify things a bit concerning the practice of Dorje Sempa, it's an important practice. It's one of the very important practices, particularly in the Vajrayana, in order to purify so that our mind stream eliminates all dispositions for suffering, all the causes, the as yet not expressed causes of suffering, all of the dispositions that will ripen in suffering for us in the future, that through practice we dissipate them. In order to dissipate them, it's very important, as much in the practice of the sutras as in the practice of the tantras, to rely on what we call the four powers. The power of regret, the power of the support, the power of the remedy, and the power of commitment. The first is recognizing what is negative as negative, the afflictions, harmful actions that I may have accomplished based on the afflictions, negative actions of body and speech, having directly harmed, indirectly harmed sentient beings, motivated by self-centeredness, desire, hate, what I remember, what I don't remember. Consider these acts as most harmful for myself, a promise of suffering for myself. Regret in terms of becoming aware that we have drunk poisoned water without knowing it. That in thinking I was accomplishing my own benefit, I carried out negative actions. So sincere regret. And on the basis of this regret, change our orientation, rely on refuge, bodhicitta. Henceforth, I will pursue enlightenment. I place myself under the protection of the three jewels, the great bodhisattvas. And then the power of the support is I will apply myself to correcting the errors that I have committed. In this case, particularly the practice of Dorje Sempa, that is a remedy for negative actions. I will apply myself to this. And then I will never commit these actions again. If we apply ourselves to these 4 powers or strengths, then dispositions of weak strength will be completely limited, and even extremely strong dispositions will be greatly weakened, even though they may have led to suffering for many lives. They may instead appear as a slight suffering. So we lessen the consequences. So that's concerning the question in terms of practice. And then, of course, carry out the practice as it is explained. Then concerning these dispositions, negative karma, what is it? It's not really an entity in and of itself that exists somewhere. It's not something that exists in something. The idea of the seed is an analogy to speak about like how a seed is a future tree. It's not a tree yet, it's a potential for a tree. Karmic seeds are potentials for being born in the lower realms, potentials for experiencing mental and physical pain. So this is the analogy of the seed. There's not an invisible seed somewhere that's hanging out in a certain level of the mind. It's just an analogy. Another analogy is that of a perfume, as if the mind stream were perfumed by the act. These dispositions are not something fixed. They're reproduced from moment to moment by our confusion, by our attachment to a certain disposition. The power of this suffering is reproduced from moment to moment in the continuum of our mind. The continuum of mind is as it was explained earlier. This moment is followed by another instant, by another instant, by another instant, and the present moment, its condition was the previous moment that preceded it, that disappeared, and this present moment will disappear, and it is the necessary condition for the following instant. And all of these dispositions are also impermanent but reproduced from moment to moment. They change, though. New thoughts, new ideas, new actions reinforce certain perfumes, certain negative dispositions, or lessen them. For example, the practice of the 4 powers will completely destabilize the power of these dispositions. It will interrupt a certain number of them and lessen the power of others, so that in our future or becoming, there will be a little chance for them to express as suffering. And they will be completely dissipated if we manage to develop the perfection of wisdom. You emphasized the fact that of connecting all of these teachings in order to eradicate self-grasping. you emphasized using these teachings to work on self-grasping. Yes. If I try to understand this in terms of the meditative experience, when we practice, we can relax and let go of grasping to our thoughts, that there is manifestation, but not really much happening, like dream. And then we can ask ourselves, who is experiencing this experience? What's happening? But then if something happens in the end, it's just a thought. I feel like we can recognize that there's no one really observing. So is the idea of working on self-grasping is training in this understanding that both the phenomena that arise are like a mirage, and also the one observing is a mirage, that both phenomena and observer are a mirage? Yes. In a certain way, it resembles that. We could say that through examination, we won't find any object or subject that is substantial. We could start with just the aspect of subject, that is, of course, this feeling of I. Of course, intellectually, I can look and see, okay, but I don't see I, and I understand the arguments. But it's also necessary for these arguments to be effective on our self-grasping when it is produced. Often we have these reflections, but nothing changes in terms of our self-grasping, our self-centeredness, when it arises. It's necessary to see this. This is what I meant to say. This critique in the text, this point isn't necessarily mentioned, and the text is especially a presentation of the perfection of wisdom. And in terms of the perfection of wisdom, there's no particular rational argument presented. In terms of being in and of itself or analysis. But in the text of the Madhyamaka, there are many analyses on this subject that we can apply. So the same thing goes for self-grasping as grasping phenomena. So long as there is grasping of phenomena, of course, there's grasping of self. This is why it's necessary to carry out this analysis of both graspings, self and both observer and object. I'm not sure, but the answer was helpful. As a follow-up, how do we cultivate the observation that phenomena don't have self, or how do we make this effective in daily life? How does it happen? The effectiveness is that there's less desire, less hatred. It has to remedy the afflictions. We're so habituated to and anchored in self-grasping. It's always hiding somewhere. We can reflect on lots of profound subjects, but we never really attack self-grasping. And then we're surprised. Why do I still have afflictions? I studied the Dharma. I meditated. I study and I meditate and I still have pride. In fact, I'm a meditator and I'm a teacher. It's my religion. It's my philosophy. All of that is illusion. We have to somehow manage to arrive at our appeasing our mind, that jealousy, ill will, discrimination, all of this is reduced. This is what the Dharma is for. And the conditioning force of suffering is these things. That's the basis for karma and becoming. Are we going to suffer in the future or not? You don't have to ask a God, just ask ourselves. Do we maintain our afflictions or not? So to conclude a bit on this point, as I was saying in the beginning, the importance is to have confidence in causality. The teaching on the absence of self and emptiness does not call into question at all causality, rather the opposite. For example, just to remain on the subject of self, of me, some people say, well, if there's rebirth, then there's someone who's being reborn. If someone accomplishes an act, and it's the same person who will receive the consequences. There's this kind of concept that we can have. If there's being in and of themselves, then this being in and of themselves, this pure original being, whatever they do, they're always pure. In India and in other philosophies, ancient philosophies, but still today, many philosophies believe that there's a self and it's pure. That some people have noble nature, and regardless of what they do, if they act badly, if they act in a negative way, they're substantially established as being noble. A Brahmin, for example, is born noble, whether they kill or steal or whatnot, they're still noble. They're substantially established as such. An untouchable is established as not noble. Whether they're kind, generous, or whatever, they're always established in this way. There's no change possible. But we can see there isn't any substantiality. We're always becoming. At a certain moment, we can be someone kind, or due to our confusion, we can have attitudes that are not noble. And all these changes come from the fact that there is not a self, an essential self. If there was an essential self, there would be no becoming, no change, no possible causality, because we are. If we exist in and of ourselves, then this could never change. The absence of existence of I in no way calls into question us and future lives. Rather, the opposite. Future, past lives, all of this change is only possible because there is no essential being. And all of these births come from the fact that we grasp self where there isn't one. Suffering, the origin, the basis of suffering is this ignorance, this misunderstanding, this grasping of self where there isn't one. If we manage to liberate ourselves from this, we liberate ourselves from the karma of actions and of becoming and suffering. So, in this sense, the Buddha said it's not just ethical discipline or asceticism or remaining, keeping our mind calm. It's not enough. We have to be able to see the insubstantiality of the self, that there is no essential self. It is necessary to go beyond this grasping of duality, ultimately. This is why knowledge, wisdom, discernment has such an important place. I haven't seen a religion or a tradition where knowledge and discernment is emphasized more than in Buddhism. It is through this discernment, this knowledge, that we can liberate ourselves completely from suffering. But for this, of course, we need a stable mind. We need to gather positive conditions. We need to adopt ethical discipline, to make practice a priority. It's the only thing that's worth doing if we can. The greater our confidence in causality is, the more it grows, the more courage we will have. We'll see that it is the absolute priority. Follow Milarepa's example. Distractions, sure, we're distracted. We know what it is to be distracted, but it's endless. There is no end to this. It will never end. And all of this is carried by ignorance, by not seeing reality, although there really is a possibility to be free from suffering, to escape from this endless continuation of life and death. Milarepa said, "It is not death that I fear, but rebirth." Some people are afraid of death, but death itself isn't so terrifying. The terrifying part is the lack of freedom due to our own confusion. We attach to aggregates that we take to be a self. That's an act of our mind due to the misunderstanding of our mind. Thank you for your attention.
Nam di tamche ziba nye toni nye be ranam pamchin che ga na che balab trubai si be tso len ro wa shu.